Hello, dear viewers, friends, and all that. This is TBT, and welcome to another ARK Creature Feature. Today's episode will feature a dinosaur that answers the age-old question, what if the Panzer IV was alive? I am, of course, referring to the Ankylosaurus, or Ankylosaurus, depending on your pronunciation, tomato. For those of you that are new to this series, this is where I'll be covering this creature's base stats, abilities, where to find one, how to tame one, and ways you can use them to improve your experience in ARK Survival Ascended. I'll also be talking about my opinions on ARK's take of this creature and give it a final score based on all of these categories from 1 to 10. Remember, this anky is not the historical fossilized one that existed in real life. This is a species that is created and modeled after it in-game universe. At best, it would be an artificial evolution, so to speak. So comparing these two apart from in-game abilities representing something in real life that the creature had makes no sense, so I'll avoid that for the most part. I will make an exception, though, for size, but that's mostly because of something I want to talk about later as a thing. We'll get to that. Now, before we go any further, if you enjoy this content, go ahead and give this video a like. Be sure to comment and subscribe if you haven't already done so to please the algorithm gods and spread this video across the platform. And then hit that notification bell so you never miss it when a new video comes out. It helps out a lot and I greatly appreciate the support. Alrighty, now that we've taken care of that, let's dive in. Stats. The Anky is one of those dinos where if you can find it on the map you're playing on, you will tame it because you need the metal and this thing is going to be better at harvesting it than you are until you get the mining drill, which you can't get yet in ARK Survival Ascended, so don't worry about it. Thankfully, it has the stats to back up taming it beyond just farming metal nodes. At level 1, the Ankylosaurus has a base stats of 700 HP, 175 stamina, 150 oxygen, 3000 food, 250 weight, and then 50 damage on its tail attack and 30 damage on its bite attack. And when it levels up in the wild, it then gains 140 additional HP per wild level, 17.5 stamina per wild level, 15 oxygen, 300 food because, that matters to an anky, right? And then 5 weight, and then 2.5 additional damage on the tail attack and 1.5 on the bite. And these might not seem like very big numbers, but it's important to remember that these are the stats of a creature at level 1. So that's what this thing is going to be when you tame it right out of the box. Or not when you tame it, but like when you encounter it. If you spawn it in at level 1. I say if you spawn it in, because the chances of you, unless you have settings a certain way, of running into one are almost 0, and they are 0 on official settings. So not something you're going to run into a whole lot unless you're, seeking one out. You will normally find them, and they will normally be much stronger, especially when you tame them, because these values get a small buff, and then increase from there by a percentage level. With starting with 5.4% with additive 0.07% HP, plus 10% stamina, plus 10% oxygen, plus 10% with multiplicative 15% food, plus 4% weight, and plus 1.7% with additive 14% and multiplicative 17.6% for melee. It's important to remember that when you see your creature's stats on screen, you will see, if it's at level 1, it will have 100% melee damage. It will not show 50 and 30, which is the actual damage numbers. And the reason for that is because that's showing you the percentage of the damage that this creature will do at the level that it's at. So if it's level 150, it's going to be doing a whole lot more than 100% damage. But the base damage, before factoring in armor resistance and anything else, would still be 50 on that tail attack and 30 on that melee. It would be 50 times whatever the melee damage stat percentage is. Alrighty, and again, in the wild, you won't find one at level 1 unless you have a setting that allows it, and what you will, however, do is you will find one where the numbers will be randomly allocated based on stat points for each level that it has in the wild. And again, as it is now, those numbers aren't going to seem like much, but they stack quickly. A max level anky will be much, much stronger And even by base, this stat assortment isn't bad at all, especially the damage on those attacks. It's actually pretty cracked. Alrighty, now with these numbers sufficiently crunched, and I do apologize if these are a little confusing, I'm going to flash the stats on the screen right here, and then we're going to look at some of the abilities that this thing has. Okay, pause the video there if you need to, and take down some notes if that helps. Let's move on. The Ankylosaurus has 3 abilities, and this is where it unfortunately shows its age as an ARK creature, because man, oh man, this thing could do with a TLC. It really needs it just stand out. Okay, the first ability we're going to talk about is the tail swipe attack. This is the left click. Anky has a bony club tail. Anky obliterate your skull with said club tail. This is, again, the left-click attack, and it does 50 damage as discussed. But what we didn't discuss was that it has a decent amount of reach with a base range of 330 and a good knockback, meaning that you will knock your opponent far enough away from you that by the time you are able to use this attack again, they will almost certainly be back within range just to get hit again before they touch you. Rinse and repeat similar to how you would with a stego. The bite attack. For some reason, the Anky can also bite people and dinosaurs. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but why? Why is that what they went with? Anyway, this attack does 30 base damage and has a range of 250 with significantly smaller but still notable knockback than the tail swipe. The Ankylosaurus also gets a passive ability in the form of weight reduction of 85% on raw metal and raw metal only. Couple this with their ability to harvest it, and they are amazing at gathering this stuff. And by amazing, I mean for a long time, they were the creature that did it. They are really the original metal farmer, and honestly, in terms of how easy it is to get one, and how early you can get one, and their metal output, they're probably still the best, I think, in a lot of ways. Even though there are creatures now that can do the job better, technically. The Anky can also harvest flint, stone, crystal, thatch, wood, obsidian, and berries. And berries with that. Not with its tail stripe, but with its bite. But it doesn't get a weight reduction for these resources because that makes sense. Okay. Like I said, it is able to harvest with its bite, but that is only limited to berries. So already doing better than the Doedicurus because it can at least harvest some berries where the Doedic can't seem to do that. Anyway, I'm sure you're wondering where the hell you find one of these things. Well, let me tell you. The Ankylosaurus can be found in much of the northern sections in the snow for some reason. Again, I ask, why? They can also be found in the central portions of the island around the volcano and the adjacent mountain, as well as that big tall mountain in the redwoods and on Herbivore Island. They are reasonably common, but do remember that when you're looking for one, this is ARK. So the moment you want a good one, you're not going to find one for at least 2 hours. Hashtag deal with it. The Anky is very, very simple to tame. I would recommend the classic 3x3 base stone box with two walls high on all sides and a ramp on one end. If you have an RG, all the better, because that means you can assemble this thing at your base and then go grab the Anky, bring it home, and drop it in the box, and then commence the knockout tame as normal. Once it drops, it will be eating regular kibble followed by mejo berries as its preferred food. However, it's worth noting that on official settings, once knocked out, these things will take a while to tame off of berries. You'll see I do use vegetables here. In ARK Survival Evolved, they were able to, they were a better taming food than the berries, but for some reason I couldn't find any information on if they still do that in Survival Ascended. I don't see why they wouldn't, but I just couldn't find any information to corroborate that. They seemed to, from what I could tell, but I don't know. But anyway, I digress. The important thing here is that on official servers, these things are going to take a while to tame if you're using berries. You might need some narcotic, but you'll also need a Spotify playlist and possibly a movie to watch. You're going to be here a while. In single player, it's not too bad, especially since you can alter your settings. And in playing with your friends on, like, custom settings, not too bad. But on official, oh dear lord. Oh... No, no, no. Anyway, once you've gotten your Anky, slap a saddle on it. The saddle unlocks at level 36 and is made in the smithy. Alright, guys, it's the Anky. I mean, who doesn't know what this thing is used for? Okay, I'll go over it. The Anky is primarily your metal harvester. You want to level weight and melee with some HP when you've got an Anky designed for this purpose. Melee, because that actually increases the output on its tail attack, like how much metal it grabs. You can have your RG carry it around, and these days it'll automatically swipe at any metal or stone nodes in range with its tail. Simple as that. But that's not all it does, and some of its other uses might surprise you. Ankys have a decent HP pool and pretty damn good melee, which means they can serve as a tank in combat. However, the lack of damage resistance really, really hurts them compared with something like a Stego or even the Arthropleura when in melee combat. That said, they can still hold their own thanks to those stats. And since they boast some of the best base damage attacks in the game, they can definitely dish that fair share punishment back. I would say they're good in combat, but not great. Definitely not as great as they should be. We'll get to that. Now, here's something fun. Ankys are pretty fast swimmers. Somehow faster than they are on land, in spite of being an armored dinosaur with stubby oh, forget it. The more I question it, the more I lose what's left of the shreds of sanity that I have in my brain. Anyway, you can take them underwater to do some harvesting as well, just so long as you watch that oxygen meter. On that note, there is a reason to level oxygen with this thing if you're going to take it underwater. Or, you could tame a Dunkleosteus and do that exact same thing in the water with a creature that is meant to do that. Just saying. As a gatherer, they can farm narcoberries pretty well for you, as well as the other types, thatch and wood as discussed. Less so on the wood, but it's still something. They are decent at it. It's not what they're known for, but they can do it. It's also worth pointing out that because they have a good AoE on that tail swing, if you need to clear space around your base or to build, these guys are pretty good for it. It's a very niche thing, but it's still something. Although, again, you could also just tame a Bronto, do the exact same tail attack, and just watch as the entire forest in front of you disappears. Like a magic trick. Still, all that being said, they are pretty useful and a powerful tame to have. Once you have one, you'll never regret that you went through the trouble to get it. My big gripe isn't that they're bad, but that they could and should be so much better. Alrighty, now I get to get my soapbox, because we're going to go on a little rant here. Well, kind of. To elaborate on what I just said, I do think the Anky is a good creature. Aesthetically, it's just a little too spiky for me compared with the real and also significantly larger Ankylosaurus from the fossil record. The design we have here works, don't get me wrong. It just makes you think this creature is an absolute tank, which it should be. This thing should be bar none the best tank dino in the entire game. It is good, but it's not even close to the best. The real-life Anky was so heavily armored that not even a T-Rex would pick a fight with one unless it was desperate. They could tank a T-Rex's jaws, to some extent. More on that later. In-game, their basic abilities are fine, but they're just that. Basic. It does its job well, and it does look cool, even if it's not entirely to my liking. Okay, now we get to the part, what would I do to improve this creature with a TLC? Boy, this is going to be awkward when we get to creatures that have already TLC'd. But that's another problem for another day. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to nerf the bite a bit. It's not OP by default, but you'll understand why in a second. We'll drop that range on the bite to 150 and the damage to 15, maybe 20. The tail strike is getting a small buff to 55, maybe 60 damage with the same range and knockback that it already had. And why? because the anky is known for that club tail that could shatter the legs of a T-Rex. Not like into pieces, but like break the bones. The current passives remain the same with one addition. By default, the anky now has a 10% damage resistance to all physical attacks, including ranged weapons. This is key because not all creatures with armor resistance get that benefit for ranged weapons, and indeed some, like the Arthropleura, actually take bonus damage from ranged attacks. However, energy projectiles such as tech gun lasers and breath weapons will still do normal damage. And additional effects caused by attacks, whether they are physical or energy-based, such as poisons and torpor, are all calculated based on damage before the anky's resistance comes into play. And this is in both wild and tamed individuals, meaning that the damage reduction only protects you from the lethal damage. Non-lethal damage or status effects will still act as though you had taken the full amount. Gotta keep it kind of balanced, you know? We're going to increase the base HP on the anky to 800. The torpor meter is getting greatly increased in wild individuals because we are buffing the anky quite a bit here, and therefore it needs a buff it needs to be harder to get. I'm not going to change anything about its taming method because I really can't think of anything I do with it, but the base speed is getting nerfed a little bit, but not in the water. Yeah, it can stay fast in the water. This doesn't make any sense, but it is funny, so I'll allow it to stay. The anky's tail attack can now damage all tiers of structures below tech. Alrighty, here's where we get to the fun stuff. I'm also going to give it a new C ability called Hunker Down, which is going to be very similar to the ability of the same name in the game called Path of Titans. If you haven't checked it out, you should do so. And in this mode, what happens is the anky will lower itself closer to the ground, and it will lose 50% of its movement speed. It can't do its bite attack, and its tail attack in this mode drops to 30 damage instead of 55. You might be thinking, wait, this is the fun stuff. Isn't this supposed to be like a buff? Hold on. I hear you. We're getting there. However, in return, its damage reduction goes from 10% to 80%, allowing it to sustain a tremendous amount of punishment, and that's before you even take the saddle into account. And it can remain in this mode for up to 60 seconds. However, if it does not take damage for more than 20 seconds, it will drop out of this mode prematurely, and it has a 60-second cooldown no matter what. So you better get your money's worth out of this. But while it's in this mode, it gains a heart meter like the Giga, which fills as the anky takes successive hits. When it's filled up, the anky can lash out with a double tail attack that swipes in both directions. Each hit does 80 base damage before melee stat calculations, with a range of 400 and even greater knockback than the original tail swing. Additionally, being struck by this inflicts the bone break status, which is similar to Gnashed. However, the enemy's speed is quartered instead of halved, and they take 5% of their HP in damage over 10 seconds. This damage can be mitigated by them not moving. Once this attack is done, you come out of the hunkered down mode immediately, cooldown triggers. But with the enemy's lowered or non-existent movement speed, you should be able to either escape or mount a counterattack if the enemy is weakened enough. This may seem OP, but the anky should be extremely powerful and extremely difficult to kill through conventional means. Like, this is one where you should have to get a little bit creative to actually put this thing down. Remember, this is in the real-life version of this creature, is something that the Rex wouldn't take on lightly. And I know this is not the same creature as the one in real life, but it's supposed to reflect that in its own way. I don't think this one does that very well up to a point. And yes, it is powerful, but I still think it's very manageable in both PvE and PvP. Okay, and aesthetically, I would make the anky a lot bigger, somewhat closer to its like real-life counterpart size. And we're gonna lose the spikes on its back and on its well, no, actually, I think just the ones on the back. The ones on the sides and on the head can stay. All right. Now, with all of that having been said, I'm going to have to give the anky a score of 7 bone-smashing tail strikes out of 10. That might seem a little low, but I just don't think this thing has enough to offer to make it stand out. It's good, It's good at and specifically at the one thing it is very famous for doing, which is harvesting metal. And it does this extremely well. But beyond that, while it does have its uses, it doesn't stand out in any particular way. I guess you could say the knockback is pretty good. And the fact that it does have such high base damage to its attacks is impressive, but not actually, it's not enough to really save it for me. So it gets a 7 out of 10. It's good. It's just not great. And just in my opinion, it's supposed to be a tank, and it really isn't. So that's what really holds it back. Maybe that's the wrong way to measure it, but I think the lost potential here really sucks. Alrighty, I think that covers pretty much everything for the Ankylosaurus in ARK Survival Ascended. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, go ahead, stomp that like button, comment, and subscribe to please the algorithm gods and spread this video around the platform. It helps a lot, and thank you so much for watching. This has been TVT. I'm signing out, and I'll see y'all on the next ARK Creature Feature.